This league, the show about the biggest league in the world, got a little bit bigger this weekend. The Jagermeister Cup in full swing. Before we touch all those things and talk about the recent transactions within the USL Championship on the coaching front, I am, of course, Peyton Galler with the Oracle, John Morrissey, dressed for the occasion in New York, and Ryan Sikora, who I guess kind of came close wearing some green in Phoenix, Arizona. Gentlemen, we'll lead off with the news, the departure of Gavin Glinton in Oakland, maybe coming a little bit quicker than anticipated, but results had been uneven, and after a loss in the Jagermeister Cup in penalties in the shootout to AV Alta after leading 2-1 late in that game, Oakland go quickly, make this decision, and they enter the market to try and figure out what the rest of their season is going to look like. I think the first point needs to be made straight away. This is a roster that is not a rudderless ship. There is talent here. With the right hire, this is a team that maybe can make some noise. Just general impressions of this decision and being so decisive for Oakland Roots.
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking at the situation from Oakland, you see the results so far. This is a team sitting as the expected goals, hate what they've been doing on the field. It feels like the moment where you need to take an action to really try to galvanize your season. I think Clinton has certainly tried to innovate over the course of the year. This club started in a 4-2-3-1. They switched into the back three and got a little bit of a bounce at that point. Over the weekend, Panos Sarmanakis was sort of doing false nine things that we haven't seen much of throughout 2025. It never felt like Clinton really nailed down a style, though. We've talked a lot on this show about, is there a need for a team to have an identity in that way? Oakland certainly did not have one. And you think about the context of the expectations for this organization in the season where they're heading to the Coliseum. They wanted results, and Glinton was not able to get them there. So I think the decision makes a lot of sense from Oakland's perspective.
I think, when you look at it, I think John points out the XG stuff, the underlying numbers being ab abhorrent, really defensively, conceding a lot of opportunities, conceding a lot of big opportunities. But even going forward, they lacked a spark. I think they have the third least shots in the league this year. They've not been able to create a whole lot. When you look at the roster, it's comprised of a lot of talented players. Panos Sarmanakis on his day can be one of the three or four best playmakers in the league. They never quite got a real grasp on him as of June 2025. And when you trade away your best player, when you move your best player in Johnny Rodriguez for a fee, not just for free or for other players or for international spots, but for a fee, and you don't find somebody who can, at least multiple people who can achieve some of the stuff that Johnny Rodriguez has done the last couple of years in Northern California, you're going to struggle for goals. So they struggled defensively, they struggled offensively, and Gavin Glinton got every chance he could to try and fix it, and he tried to his credit, but it was just in the end a ship that was probably destined to sink as of early March, and now we're in June, and they're trying to, bring themselves back up.
It's always the small margins at the end of the day, a lot of the time with these managers and what determines whether they're successful or not in, I guess, that middle quartile of the bell-shaped curve. The elite managers are always going to be successful. The managers that are out of their depth, it's going to be obvious with whatever pieces they're given. And then there's everything else in the middle. Gavin Glinton, to me, very firmly in that middle group. I don't think that at any point it ever looked like he could not do this job at the proficiency and level that it needed to be for them to maybe be successful over the long term. But it's the small things. Again, under Gavin Glinton, he had just this week surpassed the amount of days that he was the interim manager with the amount of days that he was the actual full-time appointed manager this past week, just passing over 198 total days in those first 41 games in that time frame. He had conceded, not including the game against AV Alta this weekend, a grand total of 38 first-half goals in all competitions, 37 in the league. That's the most in that time frame since he was appointed by 6, more than that Miami FC team from a year ago by 6. And again, it's the starts. They were so good at seeing out leads and never dropped points from winning positions whenever Glenn took over. The problem was they allowed 10 goals in that time frame in the first 10 minutes of games and 6 in the first 5. And it was a small focus related details. And again, that fact that they just never really landed on a centralized idea of play, that it feels like kind of left Oakland in the lurch for what is now over a year since Clinton took over.
I remember remember the end of last year for them as well, after Clinton came in and was honestly revitalizing for the team, and you got a lot of the new manager bounce, but then it continued beyond that. And for a time, Oakland was the hottest team in the Western Conference, so a very tight, just like it was this year, Western Conference. And I think they conceded 5 goals in like 3 or 4 games a couple of times last year because, to Peyton's point, they conceded early and got on the back foot and didn't know what to do. And when you look at the end of 2024 to the beginning of 2025, it's the same problems. It was similar issues with slightly different personnel, especially up front. And when you have the same things plaguing your team over two different personnel groups over, 6 or so months, the end of last year, the beginning of this year, you kind of have to look at it and say, well, I think we need to move on and find a different voice that can get this squad that we've put money into, some results, some points.
Yeah. It should also be added, and John, I want to get your read on this, that a lot of that group that was successful for them last year, whether it was by coach's decision or them being moved on, the two big departures being Memo Diaz and Johnny Rodriguez, the two best players for Oakland last year, in my estimation, they're not there. And then there's players like Camden Riley, Paul Blanchette's moved on from, players that were there for them last year that Gavin Glinton consistently did not pick this season. And that's the thing I think is confounding the most about how this has played out for Oakland this year. Why is Camden Riley, after getting back from the injury, not a bigger part of the process?
So many of the decisions in terms of squad building were really confusing on top of the lineup choice. And I think to a degree, that lends some credibility to the fact that maybe Glinton was treated a bit unfairly here. The players that come in, Kai Green to an already dense defensive unit, Julian Bravo as well in that same sense. They signed 3 or 4 fullbacks who were all competing for minutes in the same spot, didn't bolster the central midfield.
Mm,
So he was playing with a deck that was kind of stacked at one end and thin at the other, compounded by his own decisions. It's a combination of Gagi, Camden Riley, those are players that proved they could do a job. Riley especially felt like that missing piece in the midfield that could provide protection in front of the back line, occasionally give you some ball carriage. Just do Camden Riley things because he's a really expressive piece on his day. That's one of the complicating factors in this whole situation. How much of that should fall on Glinton? What's happening behind the scenes that's maybe making him lean this way squad wise? Again, I'm not going to fault the Roots for doing it, but it feels like there's something a little bit deeper with this team right now.
And like you mentioned, all the fullbacks they brought in, Peyton, you said Memo Diaz and you said Johnny Rodriguez were their two best players. I thought by a pretty comfortable margin as well. I don't think it was really much to argue that Memo Diaz and Johnny Rodriguez were the two best players on the team. You bring in all those fullbacks, one of which is Jurgen Damm, as kind of your punt, and you're hoping you hit on Jurgen Damm to be the Memo Diaz type replacement. And up front, it's Peter Wilson, who's done a half decent job at times this year, and it's EJ Johnson. Those are not players, as good as Wilson might be, that are going to replace Johnny Rodriguez. The fullbacks they brought in are not going to replace the effort, the work rate, the connectiveness, the output, assist wise and numbers wise, chances created wise, as Memo Diaz. So you move these two players, and it's less so for me at least about buying players that clogged some of the same positions as John said, though that does matter, and more so not finding somebody who can be championship proven at getting you 10 goals. You have that up front. Or creating 35 chances, 30 chances. If you find two of those things to replace those two guys you give up, easier said than done, then you're probably not, in the situation you are because you've adequately replaced the pieces you lost.
yeah. I think it goes beyond that too. Like you mentioned some of the fullbacks. I think they were trying to shift the style to more of a back four central idea this year. They very quickly decide that that's not something that's viable for them and go back to that 3-5-2, 3-4-3 kind of hybridy thing. But it's small player. It's the midfield. They bring in Bobosi Biruhanga, a player that has a profile that could be useful to maybe fill in the Jose de Naciano departure. Napa Motoso is allowed to leave. And these were just kind of guys that gave you a 6.5 to 7 out of 10 every game that helped them build a formula that was successful last year and doing the opposite to some extent of what Loudon's had so much success with this year. There's a lot of the same DNA in terms of the roster build and retention with maybe one star player. That was Johnny Rodriguez for them. It is, of course, the ball father himself, Abdulatif Abukora, and Loudon. And Loudon has been able to keep that group together, build around Abdulatif, and go somewhere. And Oakland, it felt like as soon as they put together a foothold, last year finished really poorly. So I would understand if they were looking at the roster and saying this is not something substantial or sustainable. But yeah, like it's much more than just Johnny. And I think that's going to be the top line analysis across the board elsewhere in the league, people kind of giving their 2 cents on this. I think it's much more than Johnny Rodriguez being allowed to leave. I think that that accentuates it. But yeah, I think that without Johnny, bring in Peter Wilson, keep all the other players that we just talked about, they're fine.
Well, and they did the thing that every team in this league dreams of doing, which is sell a good player,
Sure.
some money, and then a player who was already in your squad kind of ascends to fill some of those needs. Wolfgang Prentice has been a good goal scorer this year. They've gotten that part, but it just doesn't feel, again, I'll keep saying it. You can't get rid of 24 goals over the last 2 years and not replace it with someone who you are certain can get you 10 goals this year. You can't do that. Even if Wolfgang Prentice does the same stuff he's doing now, even if Peter Wilson can score 8 or 10, it's not a guarantee, right? And that's the biggest thing they lacked. Is it, you're right, it is much more than Johnny, but at the simplest scale, you can't make the moves they did and not, replace those players and expect to compete, which they clearly thought they could have.
And I think there's something to be said for the Loudon brand of continuity relied on very strong underlying numbers, a
Sure.
real sense of we built this under principles and we know how we're going to play.
And the same
Glinton
coach.
inherited, there we go, the same coach.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Glinton inherited that team, never really had a sense of style. Like it was pragmatism that got them into the postseason. So running it back while it was on the table, it's natural that he wanted to get some of his guys in there. And the way they went about it, for my taste, was completely wrong. Like they really screwed the pooch over the winter. But I think there are still marginal gains that this team can make with this squad, Peter Wilson included, who's a good player who has shown some flashes, that a fresh voice ought to be able to
Yeah.
get out of them.
Elsewhere in this lovely league, there were many games to be played, many of them involving League One teams, many of them involving League One teams beating USL Championship teams. It's the Jagermeister Cup, boys and girls. Oakland lost. That's why Gavin Glinton is looking for a new job today. Groups at this point starting to maybe take shape. We're about halfway through. Most of the teams have played 2 games at this stage. Which groups are most interesting to you going forward from this weekend's round of results?
Hey man, Oakland didn't lose. It was a draw.
It's a good point. This is true. They did get a point. Like you say it tongue in cheek. They did get a point from it though.
I think a lot of the groups have made themselves really interesting, and like not to do the Phoenix Rising thing every week that we seem to find my way through, but Group two, the team in first has 4 points, New Mexico. The team in fifth the team in sixth has one. The team in fifth and fourth has two. So there is a game of separation in that group because of the playoff, because of the penalty shootout, right? That allows a team to grab an extra point. Phoenix is able to get a draw, having trailed twice. They're now on 2 points. El Paso's on 2 points from their shootout win in the first game. And now you've got I think a game on Wednesday, San Antonio and Colorado Springs competing for the likely driver's seat in Group Two if one of them can find 3 points there. So now you've got a really interesting dynamic in the southwestern part of the Jagermeister Cup.
Yeah, and the dynamic within that group in and of itself is fascinating because it's really been immune from the cup sets we've seen in some of the other divisions. Like the U and granted small sample size, but the championship sides are taking care of business when faced with the opportunity. It makes for a little bit more of a boring dynamic if you're looking for some of that intrigue. But I think like Phoenix has used it as an ability to get some results and get right. Colorado Springs with a really cathartic victory over the weekend that's going to help them out a lot. I think that's a useful way for some of these clubs to leverage this competition.
Yeah, 100%. And even like in the case of Indy 11, who have put together their arguably two best performances of the year, you could
Yeah,
say like one Knox is a good team. That was an impressive victory to go there and win. In this competition, like things aren't going well for them in the league, but maybe assert some dominance here in Group Three, and as they start to set the tempo in that one. I don't know. We're in an interesting place with this competition, still trying to figure out precisely how teams will value it. And I think this weekend maybe showed that there can be some parity that was unexpected after the first weekend.
I think what we saw in the first weekend, we talked about it a little bit on the show, was feast or famine in League One. There were League One teams that would perform and take points, think Naples, and there were League One teams that got battered. What immediately comes to mind would be Madison. I think they were the team that lost 4-0 to Indy. So you look at that, and Group Three has kind of been all about the championship teams. You've got Birmingham and Indy on 6 points, 4 points clear of the next closest team. Those two look likely to take advantage of the at least the winner and the top runner up sort of spot as it stands. But if you want to find the microcosm of the second week of Jaeger Cup action, you go to Group 6 and you look at 5 points for Miami. I think it's 4 points for Tampa. And I'm going to read it right now. It's three for South Georgia Tormenta, three for Naples, three for Greenville. Charleston on 0. They've dropped as many points in the Jagermeister Cup to League One teams as they have all year in the championship. That now is the other one outside of Group 2 that I look at and go, there's where you're going to get your League One team. And if a League One team can get their way into the last 8, that's when the competition to me gets really intriguing and we start to really learn a lot about its long-term
Sure.
potential in the ecosystem of the league.
Sure. And by my count, that is one of only, what, two groups that have three League One teams, correct? And the team that is flying away in the championship is the one that's at the bottom. And that to me feels like, okay, if there is an opportunity for somebody from League One to win a group, right now it looks like that one is maybe the one to circle.
I
Yeah.
mean, and talk about a get right weekend for a team in this. Greenville, who's been in really
Yeah.
unlucky and poor form in the league, doing what they did and keeping a clean sheet at Patriots Point, huge for them. And I mean, if Greenville advances, wouldn't be shocked. Naples obviously off to a great start. Tormenta has been rough in league play too, and they go and do what they do against Tampa Bay. It doesn't end up being a win, but it's a positive performance. Feels like any team in Group 6 could go on and make a run to advance, honestly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Charleston's still somehow in it if Miami drops the last 2 games, and we'll see. I think that's the other litmus test for how the competition looks in year one. What does Charleston decide to do from here? They've got a lot of young, talented players, Vigo Ortiz. Do they give them minutes in this kind of environment, looking at the table and going, well, we can only get 6 points. We probably can't win the group. 6 points probably isn't enough to get out in second as one of the top 2 teams.
Mhm.
How does Charleston treat this competition over the next month? Right? Like that's the
Yeah.
next big question.
Yeah. And it's not like Charleston fielded a B squad, really. Like it was rotated, but Cal Jennings started. I think they started Nenan Hosu at center back, maybe. Like they did some strange things. They experimented, but it was not the B team. It wasn't all the academy kids. And Greenville, with all 27% of their possession and all the might of Ben Zakowski, win at Charleston. That's the most, I cannot believe that that happened. And it was 1-0. Battery have scored, I think, 17 goals in their last 5 league games. And I don't know. Make it make sense. We'll try and do exactly that from here on out. We take this week to maybe come up for air, survey the land, look at the big picture, and we've all come to book club, if you will, with a couple of big stats to maybe pull a string of yarn about what's going on in the league and prompt a topic. Ryan, we'll start with you. The big statistical observation you bring to the table about what's going on in the USL Championship right now is what?
The Observational Invitational, right? I mean, I
Yes.
can't believe you didn't use that chance, the opportunity to say it there.
This is not in that family of canon, but yes.
I brought two today. I want to start though with what could potentially be an all-time race in the Eastern Conference this year. With Charleston, who we just talked about losing, and with Louisville City, and you look at a Charleston team that, as it stands right now, are fifth in league history in goals per game average, fifth in league history, goals per game average, smaller sample size, only a third of the season, but the underlying numbers would suggest that they should stay in that top five, top 10. Their goal difference is top five in league history. Their points per game have them on pace for 72 points, which would be the second most ever in 4 games less than Lou City did it last year. And then Louisville City, who have the best defensive record as it stands right now per game in league history. First, only zero point 0.5 per game, I think, is what they're giving up. They are on pace for 66 points, and their difference, I think, in points per game from last year to this year is 0.04. We are looking at two teams playing to the most elite that they can in two very different ways. And to me, that makes it the most intriguing. I won't call it a title race because you're really only competing for a Players' Shield and the Eastern Conference regular season one seed. But you are looking at the most impactful, best ever race to first that we've ever seen in the USL Championship. And that is unbelievably enticing.
Yeah. And oh, by the way, Loudon is 1 point back of Louisville at this point as well.
It's
And
fantastic.
Charleston plays Loudon on the road this weekend too, to just maybe ratchet the level up a little bit. John, what do you make of where the East is at right now? I know we've talked a lot about it. What does it say about the big picture, though, maybe in the league in your mind?
I mean, I think it's ultimately healthy for the league that they've got clubs that are looking this good and playing this attractive level of soccer. I actually had a Louisville Charleston pitting them against one another stat here, in that Charleston leads the league with 29 successful through balls. The second best team in the league is Phoenix at 13. So Charleston is literally lapping the rest of the division. Meanwhile, Lou City, two successful through balls all season long. That's it.
To add on to John's through ball stat there, I think JD Torres has 17.
Yeah.
I think JD Torres has more through balls played than any other team in the league.
What is a through
Which
ball
is in
What is a through ball?
statistically?
whatever Opta tells me, man.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. But I think it goes to really highlight the stylistic gulf between these clubs. Like, that's a great indicator of the fact that Charleston can keep the ball on the ground, possess like they want to, drag you out of shape, and then hit you with that killer pass, usually from JD Torres. Lou City is a little bit more physical, a little bit more systematic. They aren't about that classy possession game. And I think it makes the race more fun. Again, we've talked a lot about the stylistic difference between these clubs and the importance of that identity. That's the reason they are so good. And that's why, for my taste, combine the ideas with the squads, and it's a real strong explanation of their success.
Through ball for Opta. A pass splitting the defense for a teammate to run onto. Hardly an easy container to put something into. The fact that they do it a lot is probably pretty good.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Glad we are in agreement on this. Yes. So I think though that just speaking to maybe the thing that you're getting into here, John, before I blacked out looking for what a through ball was definitionally, according to Opta, and totally closed my ears off, is that there is a systematic difference. There is an oil and water, a negative and positive charge aspect to this Louisville Charleston thing that makes it more interesting. Their styles have come along throughout the year and have gotten us to a place where we feel comfortable saying that they are the opposite of one another in a way that maybe hasn't been true in years past when they've come together.
I think it's only starkened as the years have gone on. These are
Yeah.
clubs that have been successful for a while. I mean, 3 years really for Charleston since Pierman came into play. And each season it's become more obvious what they're trying to do. They've doubled down on the system. Maybe last season was the peak of it for Lou City. I think we'll see as the year goes on. But Charleston finally feels like this is the apex of the project at large in terms of Ben Pierman Ball and the ideas behind it.
Yeah. And they've conducted themselves as such with the investment and the way that they've bolstered this roster. It's kind of like two magnets of the similar charge, right? Where they've come together as the same species of this same caliber. And as they've come into contact with each other, they've pushed each other in opposite directions towards opposite sides of the spectrum a little bit. I just think that that's an interesting layer of tension and drama to this whole thing. Which idea is going to be better at the end of the day? Who's smarter between these clubs? That is, I think, at the heart of this whole thing, the most fascinating component of the Louisville Charleston race.
And I think the best part about it, right, is that it's up to you, right? You can look at the way Charleston is built and the way Charleston has decided to play and the way Charleston has decided to invest. And you can look at Louisville for all of those things. And we could probably put 20 different USL Championship enjoyers. We could probably put our audience up in the chat against each other, and it would be a 51-49 split one way or the other on which team you would rather watch, which team you would rather build a roster in and such like that. I think it would be neck and neck as to how these two teams, even though they've gone in opposite directions, to Peyton's point, both have been wildly successful and equally as enjoyable to the point where you're like, I'd take either one of those. And, I think Peyton and I might disagree on which one it is. John and I might disagree. And that's the cool thing about the race.
Yep. All right, John, another number for you. I know you just provided one. We're going to go right back to the well, though. Different topic.
Yeah, I'm hyper focusing here. I am biased by the fact that I got to see this guy live in person on Saturday, and I just want to talk about Hope Avievu,
Oh,
who
I thought you were
is
going to say
putting up,
Ryan, who you also.
yeah, he's putting up 6.7 duels per game right now. He's putting up 0.53 pressing takeaways per game, both in the top quarter of attacking midfielders, all while having 8 goal contributions. This weekend was a match where Phoenix Rising gave up 3 goals against New Mexico United, but they figured out with the tight marking in the midfield an approach to go at New Mexico. In terms of the trend I kind of want to dig into, is there a team that can stop the freight train that has been the Dennis Sanchez system? We've seen El Paso use that 4-3-3. We've seen Phoenix let Avievu man Mark Getty and Zalalem. I don't know if there is one singular blueprint, but what I think the takeaway I kind of want to drive at through the lens of Avayevu's high numbers is that if you've got an energetic midfield that's willing to throw their bodies out there and up those midfield takeaways, that feels like the way to get at New Mexico.
Ryan, you were there as well. What do you say?
To John's point, right? Hope has, I believe, 9 goal contributions in all competitions this year. That's 9 in 15 games. His career best mark is 14 in 23 or 24 games. So the question with Hope Avievu and to the bigger scheme with Phoenix Rising is how long do you expect it to last? Because we've never gotten a 30-game sample size of their best midfielder. So you're going to get that this year. Can he continue to play at his peak for as long as you need him to? And how does Phoenix partner that? We've seen two different holding midfielders play in that role this year. JP Skiers, much more defensively inclined, aerially capable. Carl Saint, who on his day, they would love to have him on the ball, metronomically dictating play in the midfield. And Noble Okello next to him. 6'5", the exact opposite of Hope Avievu. Not very tidy on the ball, rangy, loves to get into a clattering challenge when he can. Good out of the air, which Hope is good for 5'6", by the way. He's very good out of the air for 5'6". They have a really well structured midfield that doesn't play in a lot of structure, but is super well built and organized to the way that Pamadou Ka wants to play. And that is why I think Phoenix is going to find success against some of the premier teams in the league because they know their identity so well and they are very capable of conforming to the opposition because of the way their hard charging midfield operates and because of the way their wingers like to break and because of, JP Skiers and now Axel Lasenge, who's been a wonderful ad for them. They have all these pieces around Hope Avievu, who is not Gerald Margarita, but is Phoenix Rising's best player. He is their most important piece. He does not have every single moment in a game like Gerald Margarita has, where you can just poof out of nothing. But Hope Avievu is the one that will make this Phoenix Rising team be successful. Gerald Margarita and some of the other players up forward might be the reason they find wins in the playoffs because they've got a little more of that, pizzazz, that extra gear. But Avievu is a wonderful player that I would put in any midfield in the league. Any midfield in the league.
John, what are Ryan's underlying numbers?
Hoping
Ryan's
at the same
underlying
time.
numbers.
Yeah, yeah. How many
Well,
games he's gobbled? What are we talking about here?
yeah, one pizza eaten, one guest appearance on the radio given to me, so he's doing well.
Okay. All right. Is Ryan more diminutive than Hope Avievu? These are the questions that are worth
With my
asking.
posture, probably. Hope's got good posture.
I was told John Morrissey has great posture by Ryan Sikora this weekend.
True. It's
Yes.
true.
Yeah,
It's not
when you're short, you gotta straighten up to kind of hide that fact.
Don't
Yeah.
tell me that.
Next time, gentlemen, invite me to the cookout.
You could have paid for a ticket.
Yeah,
You didn't.
I didn't. Okay, number from me. This is more of a wide basket catch-all league-wide thing. Um, and maybe this needs to be contextualized that all early season data samples were about a third of the way through the season. Most teams have played 10 games-ish at this stage. They can be swayed much more by an outlier result. That needs to be put into this, and we will track that over the course of the season if that alters where these numbers stack up historically. So that's on the table. Also needs to be said, accurate statistical information on possession and a lot of other categories beyond 2017 in the USL doesn't really exist, at least in terms of a conclusive full body of work. So I can say this with some degree of confidence about the all time, but I can only conclusively say it up until 2017. So that's the data set we're working with. With all of that exposition and preamble done, I should also tell you this. For the first time in league's history, there are 6 teams that are averaging less than 45% possession this year. Never before have there ever been 4 that have finished a year below that mark. Here are the teams in that group. Hartford at 44.78, North Carolina FC at 44.5, Miami FC at 44.1, FC Tulsa at 44% even, and then it's Las Vegas Lights at 43.37%. You would expect them to be last. They're actually not. It's Indy 11 at 43.24. Does this mean anything? I don't know. I bring this to the table with open arms as I don't have any interpretation of its value or meaning, or if it has any at all. But I wanted the brightest brains on this league that I know to get into this and try and ascribe some.
I mean, we just got done kind of talking about how Indy has struggled. You think about Las Vegas, the clubs in that bucket tend not to account well for themselves. And kind of the last time we ran through this exercise, we focused a lot on the rise of the long ball, the fact that a lot of teams are going for that intentionally. I I think there's a strong connection between the direct style and the possession game, but there's a matter of execution that goes along with it. You weren't naming teams like Sacramento or North Carolina that we named last time when we did this practice because they're good at launching long and then winning the ball and keeping it upfield. Indy can't do that. Las Vegas really struggles to do that. So the possession is almost this metric that can give you the second level and show you who just isn't able to execute what they're trying to do.
Ryan?
You know, yes, to John's point, right, of the long balls, and you'd assume, as this game has gotten more direct, you will have more teams that are down with less possession, especially those that lack quality, which isn't to say that they all lack quality. There are good players there, but there are styles that, coaches don't want to have the ball. We've talked a lot, I think, in the group chats about Sean McCauley's Indy 11 and how while he has a very technical midfield, he is electing to play a certain way. And to me, that maybe in lies the thing that is the most jarring there are coaches actively making decisions in this league to say, we're going to play long. We're going to lean into the physical nature that this league has adapted over the last couple of years, the USL Championship. And that's how we're going to play as a team, regardless of who is out there. So right away, I would jump at the fact that, it's a more direct play, more long balls, more efforts to, be combative in moments. That would be my assumption.
Yeah. So this is where my brain went as well. And I'm glad you guys kind of walked it to this threshold because the natural assumption with a more direct style of play is there's going to be an increased amount of skirmishes throughout the game, duels, aerial duels, the full like in that category. Those numbers aren't up either. They're towards the bottom of the data set. It's the third lowest amount of duels in that time frame since 2017 overall. Aerial duels are kind of middle of the pack, just over 30 per game total. That's why I can't make sense of this. That's why it doesn't really add up to me because with the ball being played long, there's a higher chance of it being up for grabs, especially in the air. And it doesn't look like the data itself is indicating that that's happening. I don't think the quality's gone down at all, but there is a clear line being drawn this year where teams have been less able to control the game through the ball successfully, and have been more inclined to play directly.
I think I have one. I think I have one. Would that maybe, and John, you can, if I am going down the wrong path here, jump in because I don't know if it's correct at all, because that doesn't make any sense. But we talked a lot about the game and how it's become very transitional, right? Is it maybe, and the biggest thing that's happened over the last 18 months is the press, right? And trying to design a style of play where a team is being drawn into you and you're inviting a press. And maybe, by my count, there's two ways to play amongst a press, right? You can play through it as a Deserby team does, or as maybe a Danny Stone, who went on the program a couple weeks ago, team tries to play, playing through and on the ground and around like Dennis Sanchez's teams do. Or you can go over it, right? Like a Las Vegas tries to do, or like a Tulsa or a Monterey Bay do, and stuff like that. So maybe dual numbers are down because teams are playing less passes and there's less duels to be had because it's more about baiting a press and, bringing a team to you so you can get over them or through them in a quicker way. That would be my guess.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that there are teams in this league that are just leaning away from the physicality a little bit. There's a give and take, right, between the clubs that are passing short, trying to possess the ball, and the clubs that are trying to be physical and willing to kind of wait out the press. If one side is outweighing the other, it'll affect how the match is played and give you this sense of one-sidedness. Like I think about a club like Lexington or New Mexico. There are exceptions, but a lot of their games tend to have less duels because they're willing to try to pass around you and do that sort of thing, like you mentioned with the Danny Stone ethic. It's an interesting situation, and I don't know if there is one clean answer, for at least in my mind.
Okay. And just for transparency, the formula that's being used to come up with this is basically taking the total number of games played, and then taking the total number of whatever statistical category is being quantified and dividing the two sums by one another, multiplying by two in order to get the per game average for both participants.
Did you carry the five on that?
What's up?
Did you carry the five on your mathematical equation?
Say your next stat.
I have found, and interpret this as you may, that teams are, and we've said it on the show, much more inclined to not take shots randomly. I think I have found a very clear correlation, honestly, between this year and a lack of, shots per game or shots on target per game, or honestly, even goals from teams than in any other year post COVID in the USL Championship. This year, there have been five teams that average, and I'm going to actually look at the numbers because I don't want to screw it up and I didn't do some crazy mathematical equation like Peyton did. There have been five teams in the USL Championship this year that have taken less than 100 shots. There have been only 26 teams that have done that in the last 8 years. Five of the 26, and that's throwing away the COVID year of 2020 for a weird data set. Five of the top 26 least likely teams to shoot through the first couple of months of the season exist in 2025. That's 19% over an 8 or so year data set. That's not a lot, right? In fact, Hartford, and this is where it started, Hartford Athletic have the least amount of shots as of June 1st of any team that has ever played in the USL Championship. Shots on target. They have put just 20 shots on target this year. Just 20. That is it's ridiculous. Hartford is one of four teams I think in championship history to have less than the number is 35 shots on target, 100 shots and less than 10 goals as of June 1st in a single season. They're one of four teams ever. There's another team who's playing right now in 2025 that is one of those four teams. Can somebody guess?
Pittsburgh.
It is
Yeah, that was
Pittsburgh.
my guess. Yeah.
And that in lies, I think, the cool part about this stat is you have a competent team in Pittsburgh who are in a relative hunt if they can win a couple games and snag a couple points for a home playoff spot. And you have a Hartford team that is down near the bottom of either conference. And to me, I think that's what's the cool thing about these numbers is all of these teams that don't shoot the ball or, are more defensive in nature maybe it's a mixture of style and sitting in and bunkering and waiting for the right chance, not any chance, and teams that just can't create. And I think that's a really unique way to look at the league because you have good teams that are doing what Charleston is doing, scoring for fun, and you have good teams doing what Pittsburgh is doing, scoring for none. And then you have Hartford at the bottom of the table, and to a lesser extent, Lexington and Las Vegas, who can't create and are struggling to create, and therefore not getting results out of anything.
Okay. So 2 points to this. Point number one. What's even funnier is that Hartford just scored 4 goals in a game.
Correct.
Yeah. Like think about it if that game against Indy 11 were not on the books when you did this math to this point in the year. The second point comes down to the chance creation part because this is where you have to use your eye test. This is where you can't just have your nose in your computer screen in Opta and think you understand the game in full because these numbers are bearing out this way for very different reasons. Like you said, comparing Lexington to a team like Pittsburgh, the reason the shot creation is not there is completely adverse there. So I guess in your mind, as this applies league wide, what are the big reasons? And maybe I'll let John answer this first because you just brought all the numbers. What are the big reasons for this? And is it anything meaningful? Is it bad? That's the first conclusion you come to. Less shots, less fun, right?
Well, I think this actually is going to lead into a stat I had prepped for this. In 2024, there were three teams that completed 3.5 crosses or less per game. So
Hmm.
21 teams at a league were completing a fair number of crosses. This season, that has tripled. 9 teams in the league are completing 3.5 crosses per game or less.
Oh,
Charleston, dead last. New Mexico, third from bottom. Decent correlation between success and that metric. To me, that's an indicator that clubs want to be more intentional in the final third, more patient in the final third, keep the ball on the ground. So you're probably seeing less shots because they're looking for the quality and they're not just going to lump it in from the sideline.
That's great because I was going to go right to Danny DiCio's Detroit as a team. And I wonder, are they one of the nine teams?
No, but they're dead mid-table.
So, like, I was going to go there because you have a team in Detroit who has maybe slightly more of the ball than the opposition in their games, maybe 51-49, the average probably there. They play very slow, they are very methodical, very intentional, and they were kind of the bar for my team or for my number, right? A team that creates a fair enough amount of chances, that does not create any absurd amount of chances as a Charleston does or as a Louisville does, but they do just enough with their style of play because of how they set out to be very on the ground, keep the ball on the floor, slow build up, move the team around, get into advantageous spaces, and create high quality chances, high XG opportunities that you're more likely to score. That's the thing for me here that's the standout because Pittsburgh have a player in Robbie Mertz, who we talked about last week, who is currently right now on the top 25 all time for X place. They get him into good opportunities where he's able to find dangerous opportunities to score. They create high quality chances for Robbie Mertz. They don't create any chances at all, Pittsburgh. But when they do, they are looking for their front two or front three in the right moments, in the right spots to try and score goals of a high quality chance ability, high quality probability, right? So that's the number, and that's the thing that stands out to me the most there is the number is as high as it has for most of these stats, shots on targets, goals, XG. It's the highest it's been in the league since 2018 for teams taking as low as they are, or I guess the
So it's
lowest.
the lowest, yeah,
Yeah. The
not the
lowest it's been in the
highest.
league since 2018. There we go. And I think the biggest thing there is because a lot of these teams are saying, as John says, let's be more picky with what we want to create out of the game state, and that's why they're taking less shots. You're not going to see 2020 Phoenix Rising anymore, where it's 25, 30 shots a game from 20 yards out.
And I think it's useful to look at a team that has gotten worse because of that habit. Rhode Island, they're up 20% in terms of the number of shots they're taking from outside the box this season. Their crossing is also up by 26%. So this is a team that's settling on the outside of the area. They're bucking the trend and they're worse off for it. When you see a team like that that's not generating opportunities, it feels like they're settling for things in a way that the rest of the league has decided not to, which I just think is just fascinating in the context of the number of discussions we've had about that team.
100%. 100%. And I think that this offers up. I think actually before exploring forward, because I've got a number that parlays into what you guys are talking about in terms of box access. The crossing thing is interesting to me because there's a lot of data out there that says the best way to generate chances is to get into that area in between the 6 yard box and the actual 18 and try and get those cutback crosses effectively, right? That's the Brentford way of playing. That's been the Pep Guardiola way
Yeah.
of playing. With the crossing numbers going up, I does that mean that we are lacking the central creators to unlock games in central
Crossing numbers going down,
Crossing down,
went
way
down?
down, way.
unless you're Rhode Island, in which case you're setting football backwards. But
To understand that. So then actually, I guess I'll reverse it. Is the crossing aspect and the lack of that dying art form that worldwide is just the David Beckhams are not there anymore, right? There aren't crossing specialists. Is that maybe making it harder for teams to get instant offense and get that box access? Theoretically, it's the easiest way in the final third to get the ball into the box and into dangerous areas, correct?
it is, but it's very low efficiency.
Sure.
I think there's something to be said for lumping it in, creating chaos, and going from there. But the way in the year 2025 that clubs value control and don't want to give their opponent the ability to clear play, you're putting more of a value on recycling possession, carving out the half spaces, and seeing what you can do rather than taking that risk.
Can I tie it back to the top of the show in a sense? Is Oakland one of those nine teams that has gone down in crosses, or have they gone up? Or are they
Oakland in 2024 played 3.7 crosses per game. Oakland this year is very near the bottom, down to 2.8 crosses per
they
game.
were
So
almost to 3.5 already, and now they're even still down.
I think it's an interesting difference between a club like Charleston, where the crosses are a sign of their efficiency, and ditto for New Mexico, and a team like Oakland, where that means that they are ineffective at using the midfield to get the ball into good areas where they might be able to cross.
I do want to counter though, because with a team like Charleston, like a team like Detroit, they are playing cross-shaped balls from wide areas. They are just doing it from further up the field, deeper towards their own end, and playing those passes into space as opposed to playing them across the 18. JD Martinez or JD Torres, excuse me, not the baseball player. JD Torres has made a living off of that this year. Cedeno has done that a bunch this year, where they're playing a crossing shaped ball. It is just coming 20, 30 yards further upfield so a player can run.
Think about the spatial
Yeah.
relationships when you're hitting that sort of pass. The
Yeah.
field is open. There are less defenders packed in against that ball. It becomes a less risky proposition when you're Ben Pierman encouraging that sort of thing. And I think that's an important distinction to
Yeah.
make.
100%. I'm just trying to, I guess, illustrate the point that
Mm.
crossing as an entity can take many shapes and form and can be used in different ways. And the way to maximize the efficiency, I just think, kind of comes down to how you choose to play and do that, right?
I guess my yes, to answer your question, like a cross from deep or a very progressive pass in a transitional moment, or you've invited a press to break it open is almost like, accessing the 18-yard box before you've even accessed it, in a sense of, can we play somebody into a wide space so he can go one-on-one? It's almost like a cross. I think, is that what you're trying to get at, is you're trying to create an opportunity from deeper, and that's kind of like a cross, Peyton?
I think it's where the crosses are coming from that's important, right? The
Yeah.
action of the cross, getting a ball that is sideways in placement, coming from a wide area into a central space, that is still a useful thing. It is the places from which it is played, maybe not doing it from the touchline in the
Sure.
third, because realistically, if I think the biggest malfeasance in being a team that likes to cross the ball a lot in the modern game is you invite transition that way against you because it's the quickest way to trigger the
Get
off.
it out and go the other direction. Correct.
Exactly. And
Right.
you're not set, you can't respond to it. So that I think is the thing that needs to be dug into.
But so I think where I was going with the Oakland, with the posing of the Oakland thing, right, is this is an Oakland team that does not cross the ball a lot, but also does not create a lot.
Yeah.
And it's in the bottom, I would imagine the bottom third of teams in the league in touches in the opposition box. So I would say if I was a coach, and I am never going to be one of the smartest 150,000 coaches in the country in soccer, but if I was a coach, I would say if we can't create through the middle of the park and we can't create with a slower, methodical, possession based style, like a Charleston, like a New Mexico, like a Lexington, how do we create chances? Well, let's put a big man up top. Let's get somebody or two or three guys off of him. Let's put chaos in the box and let's serve the ball in and let's cross the ball and let's put ourselves in position to create. And that's where I think Oakland is probably one of those teams that I would highlight as a detractor of the way football is viewed now, because they're not creating from the middle of the park. They don't have the creative midfielders outside of Panos Armenakis to do so, and they are not pivoting to, let's serve the ball in successfully as much as we can. They have gone a cross and a half down from where they were last year, and they were hardly a qualifier for a good serving team in 2024. They lack an identity. That's what we talked about, right? Oakland lack an identity, and that's why Gavin Glinton is no longer there. They could never find who they were, and part of that was probably because they wanted to play, they wanted to find the space. They did not have the players to do so. And instead of shifting stylistically, they just shifted shape and tried to play the same way and solve the problems the same way. And now you're a bottom feeding team in the Western Conference because you did not decide, we don't have the players to play this way. So let's do this. Let's
Yeah.
go the alternate route. Let's, as John put it earlier with Rhode Island, set football back, right? They didn't decide to do that. And now they're not very good. And they have to figure that out. Rhode Island is not very good at creating in the attacking zones, as we've said every single week on the show. And they cross the ball too much, maybe, because they don't have that. And they're trying, but that's the thing for me, is that number is important. Both of those numbers combined are important because teams are trying to create and they can't. And instead of shifting back to maybe an easier way to create chances, a muckier way to create chances, they're still trying when they don't have the quality to do so. It was a long tangent.
John, anything else to offer on that particular Bible verse from one Ryan Sakura?
No, I thought it was, yeah, well said on his end.
All right. I do have one more number if we are so bold to invite something like that back into the show after all we've covered and the fact that we just whiplashed in a different direction all of a sudden. Um,
Yes. Yeah.
Kind of couples in with what has been discussed though. The box touches have gone down, and that's where I was trying to get with the crossing thing. It's 18.5 per game per team this year. And I was trying to ascribe a reason for why that might be. I think you may have provided it a little bit, right? Teams are having less success getting into areas where they can ask questions of the defense. Is that something that we expect to maybe change throughout the course of the year, I guess?
When teams start to get desperate, I think they're more willing to take risks, more willing to hit early crosses. This feels like the sort of number that's going to only go up as the season goes along. And some of it is even tired legs, errors being made, defenses losing their linchpins to injury. That's the natural course of a long marathon like USL season. Right now, it certainly feeds into the narrative of a intentional shift in style across the league, but I wouldn't be surprised to see at least some modification to it.
I think if you talk to a lot of, technical directors or sporting directors around the league, they'll all kind of have the general sentiment that after about the 65th or so minute in the USL Championship, it can kind of become almost like a basketball game in the league, and teams are becoming much more transitional and much more defensive, and the game becomes all about counterattacks and all of those moments. So, to what John said, along with the desperation of needing to score and needing to create more and needing to look for more, teams will get more tired as the year goes on. And what might be right now the 75th minute as kind of the start of that transition based basketball game in July as it gets hotter, in August and September as the season gets later and the summer months start to wane, you probably get even more transitional moments and more opportunities for that. But it is really odd that, again, and I think as we pointed out earlier, teams aren't willing yet to compromise their principles, and that is giving them problems in terms of chance creation and touches in the opposition box at this point in the year.
Okay, it's interesting because I do think I have an answer that's not correlated to both of what you guys said, and that is I think the level of striker play is just down. I think that Cal Jennings has been awesome, and that maybe it's papered over the cracks that there aren't a lot of awesome number nines in the USL this year. There are a lot of awesome playmakers across the board. They're really fun tens. Jorge Hernandez. We've already talked about Abdulatif Albacora. What they've seen in Charleston this year with JD doing what he does. I don't know, like, what the second class of strikers in the USL Championship looks like in 2025.
Who is the second best nine in the USL Championship? We know who the first is. Who is the second?
Like true out and out nine, it might be Woobens this
But
year.
I don't
Out of
know if he's an
here.
out and out number nine.
Yeah.
They're using him in a similar role, but yeah, fair.
Who is the second best number nine goal scorer model type of player in the league? Again, we know who the first is. I have no clue who the second is. I have to think about it. Zach Ryan crossed my mind first.
Yeah, yeah, and he's not even playing as big of a role this year.
Correct.
JJ Williams has to be entered into the conversation.
Of course.
He's been hurt, but still, like, who are the game defining number nines in the league right now? And that maybe plays into the fact that there's not that back playoff in the box.
To shift back to the point you were making and some of the players you named, Juan Torres, famously great from shooting outside of the box.
Oh,
Abacora, same deal. Like the guys who are scoring goals are doing it from further away. Even Jorge Hernandez, who's having a breakout scoring season. So
do I have a stat for you? Just on the one David Torres of it all. He's first in the league in shots with 47. The reason for that being is he's taken 36 from outside the box, which is the most in the league by 21. Nobody else has come within 20 shots from outside the area of JD Torres. He's averaging 3.69 per game, which is the second most in league history. Ryan and I figured out who the first was. I forget the man's name. He had a weird name, but it was
Yeah,
five
I don't remember it either.
21.
So to add to that point, right? Cal Jennings, by far and away the best number nine in the league. Gap. The next highest scoring, in my mind, natural strikers, Darren Smith, 7 goals.
Yeah,
Maybe the purple patch. We'll see how that adds up,
not the
at the end
prototype.
of July.
Not the prototype. Not the
Not,
prototype.
not the prototype.
Doing it
Chico Bonfilio,
yeah.
Francisco Bonfilio at Miami, of all teams. MD Myers, who is the teammate of Cal Jennings. Justin Dillon, who's having his best season in a long time in Colorado. The Amoasants, who is certainly not a natural number nine, Elvis Amo. And that's really it. Elijah Paul, is he the second best number nine? Maybe when he plays Orange County, but that's kind of it. Like,
there's a real argument to make that Charleston has the best two number nines in the USL. I'm just gonna say
If
it.
MD Myers is playing 800 minutes like Cal Jennings is, he has 10 goals in this Charleston setup, and mostly because it's Charleston, but he probably gets 5 or 6 in any other setup, 7 or 8. Like, there's no second best number nine, and that might be the big point that Peyton's trying to bring up there is it's
Yeah.
Cal Jennings, and who else is next?
Think about all the best teams in the league right now. You want to bring up Sacramento? There's a bit of a question mark for the number nine. New Mexico, there absolutely is. We've talked about it all year. El Paso, their leader in box touches is their 10. I'm on them right now. Louisville, Philip Goodrum's been off and on. He's been hurt a little bit. Feels like a question mark to me. I've said it a lot. Rhode Island has J.J. Williams. We'll see when he's fit. I think he's the second best striker in the league right now, but we'll wait to see that. There just aren't
Is it
teams.
Peter Wilson?
Hey, dude, like he probably is on the short list. Like he probably is top 10. He's been good this year. He's been really good. So it just it
So
there aren't those teams built around their striker right now.
I'm doing more digging as we're getting into this conversation. Passes into the final third are down by about 8% this season. So the ball is spending less time in the area where you're getting the box touches, maybe indicative of a game that's being played in the midfield a little bit more often. It's so hard to explain these things because a million different factors
Yeah.
end up with the end result you're seeing. But yeah, kind of fascinating to see how striker play, possessive tendencies all influence this.
Yeah. And that's kind of the point of doing this episode every 4 weeks or so is to kind of pulse check and workshop ideas and see kind of where we're seeing the game go. What is funny is that you would imagine with a more vertical approach from teams on exhibit, you would expect to see the big man striker more prevalently.
But to John's point, right, the game and to again the vertical approach, getting stuck in the midfield, you're probably more focused on having big physical midfielders who can win duels and big, you know, strong players in your back line than you are a number nine. You might want a big physical midfield who can win the ball, get it off to a winger, and then you might want a nine who can run into the channels. There's a million different ways to build a squad for a long ball type style. And maybe the way that a lot of these teams are doing it now, because of how fluid and open the game has to be, is saying, let's get athletes in other places who can win the ball. Let's create room for our front three to take advantage of the space we've been given. And let's use that front three with nimble frontline players to attack the space that's given to us.
Yeah. All right. I think that's as good a point as any to hop off the crazy train. Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure. The soccer will be on this weekend. You should go and watch it. We'll talk to you soon.